And for more now on the situation in Venezuela and this border closure we've been talking so much about, we turn to Miguel Tinker Salas, who is a professor of Latin American history at Pomona College in California. And he was just in the state of Táchira in Venezuela, where the border there, of course, has been closed. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. To start, I'm wondering if you can just give us a brief overview here of the situation on the Colombian-Venezuelan border. You were there, so how has the smuggling and the paramilitary activity we've been hearing about affected the Venezuelan society and its economy?
Well, I wasn't in Táchira, I was in Mérida, so just to be clear, so I wasn't at the actual Táchira border, but the reality is that the border economy is maintained by contraband. It is maintained in large part because Venezuela subsidizes a large part of its products for its population. And therefore, those products, up between 35 and 40%, wind up at the border with Brazil and with Colombia and are part of this contraband trade. And what happens is that the paramilitaries, economic mafias, and others are participating in this contraband trade. And in part, Venezuela is subsidizing the Colombian economy, not only with goods and services, but also with gasoline. We know that Venezuela has the cheapest gasoline in the world, and that gasoline is making its way to Colombia, where it's sold formally and informally by these contraband forces. So again, in large part, what is happening on the Colombian border is the result of the fact that the Colombian government does not provide for its own population. So much of them have, in fact, been relying upon Venezuela, and that is taxing the Venezuelan economy to a large extent.
And how are you seeing that this border closure is affecting that system of smuggling and contraband so far? It's very early into this process, but what have you seen, especially when you were here in Venezuela?
Well, I think the important thing is that it forces the Colombian government to take responsibility for its own population and for its own conditions. That's the reality, because what's happened is that the Colombian government has depended in large part on Venezuela to subsidize its own population. And that's being done by the contraband of products. That's being done by the gasoline going across. It's still too early. Undoubtedly, that contraband cannot take place without the complicity of government authorities on both sides of the border. So therefore, in large part, this measure of taking control of the border was long in coming. It's not a surprise given the context of what's happening.
And you know, a lot of the international press is sort of painting Venezuela as sort of anti-Colombian as they've closed the border and ramped up some deportations in that border region. Let's talk a little bit about the reality for the Colombians who have come to Venezuela, migrated to Venezuela, millions of them.
Well, Venezuela has been home to millions of Colombians, and we're not just talking recently, we're talking back during the oil boom period as well as now, but in particular during the last 5 or 6 years under the Uribe administration, where you had a civil war in the country, where you had millions of people being displaced. It's important to remember that Colombia was a country with the largest population of displaced people as a result of the civil war. Paramilitary, the military itself, the false positives, where the military would kill civilians and pass them off as guerrillas. So in large measure, a large number of Colombians more recently have come to Venezuela as well, joining family and joining others as an escape valve. And Venezuela has absorbed them, has taken them in, and in the last 15 years, we've seen efforts to regularize their position in Venezuela. They've been given documents. Some of them have acquired Venezuelan citizenship. So in that sense, I think it's very important to understand that this is not an effort against Colombians. There's no attack on Colombians. There is an effort to regain control of a border. There's an effort to regularize a process that had gotten out of hand. And I think that's the central question, and that's a right any government has to be able to control its borders and to control its frontiers.
All right, great analysis there from Professor Miguel Tinker Salas. He's a professor of Latin American history. Professor, thanks so much.